Lots to discuss on today's Shea Anything podcast episode. The Jared Porter news, the fallout, what might be next for the Mets and the general manager's role. And also lots to discuss in center field as George Springer's headed to Toronto. What's the latest with Lindor extension, Bauer, Brad Hand in the bullpen? All of it coming up now.
Well, I know I got to listen. I'm going to be on it, and that was so intriguing that I'm going to listen anyway.
Welcome to the Shea Anything podcast, everybody. Doug Williams and Andy Martino with you. Reminder to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you are currently listening. So it's been really a kind of a crazy week already. We're recording this on Friday morning, and we basically an hour ago heard the news that unfortunately and sadly, Hank Aaron has passed away. And first of all, I mean, Andy, I know that you have a quick story in terms of your reporting that involved Aaron, but also, you grew up rooting for the Braves. This was this was a monster and one of the top 5 players ever in the history of baseball. But he somehow meant more than that. And really, just this month, his last tweet, if you go to his Twitter account, was publicly getting the COVID vaccination to show to all of the people that trust him, listen to him, that it was safe. And that was kind of he always realized his role in society was bigger than just being a baseball player. And I just have always admired him for so many reasons.
That's right. And, at first I was hesitant to add anything to this because I don't have anything. I've never met Hank Aaron. I don't have any experience personally with Hank Aaron. But then I remembered to the point that you made, Doug, the one experience I did have that was related to him as a reporter that I had was in 2014. Hank Aaron was quoted in a news story criticizing Republicans at that time for obstructing President Obama's agenda. That was Hank Aaron's opinion. And Aaron said, this is Aaron's quote from 2014. He said, "Sure, this country has a black president, but when you look at a black president, President Obama's left with his foot stuck in the mud from all the Republicans with the way he's treated. We have moved in the right direction and there have been improvements, but we still have a long ways to go in the country. The bigger difference is that back then they had hoods. Now they have neckties and starched shirts." Very strong comments from Hank Aaron in 2014. I happened to be covering an event a few days later that Frank Robinson attended, a contemporary of Aaron's, Frank Robinson, who's since passed away as well, and asked Robinson about that. Hank Aaron got hate mail in 2014 for those comments, calling him the N-word and all kinds of things. People accusing him of comparing the Republicans to Klansmen and just a lot of ugliness in 2014. And Frank Robinson, who at that time was an older man himself, he said to me, Frank Robinson said, "Hank Aaron is a black man. He only spoke his mind. I have seen and heard other people in this country say worse things and they don't get hate mail. It shows you we still have a way to go." So I think the point that Frank Robinson was making to me that day and that I would make now is that these men didn't just deal with these issues in the 50s and 60s. We're kind of taught in school that Martin Luther King solved racism in 1964-ish, but clearly there was the same kind of vitriol headed their way for their entire lives, and they handled it with dignity.
Yeah, and I've just been watching some of the coverage this morning and the stories about how Hank Aaron kept the hate mail that he received, when he was playing, when he was on the verge of breaking the record, and so many in baseball didn't want him to do it as a black man. And it's an important point you make that even long after he retired, even though he played forever, in 2014, he was still getting that stuff. And I thought, Chipper Jones just tweeted, "I can't imagine what Hank Aaron went through in his lifetime. He had every right to be angry or militant, but never was." And, what a difficult life he led in so many ways, but always seemed to prevail and be the bigger person that ended up having a bigger meaning to the Black community. But we've lost in the last year some incredible figures in baseball. And, Hank Aaron, what a loss today. At the age of 86. So the other, and I alluded to kind of a crazy week. The other big news, and Andy and I were, what was this? This was Tuesday morning. The Porter news
Late Monday night, like 11
late
o'clock Monday
Monday
night,
night.
and then Tuesday we were on the air. Yeah, that's right.
So late Monday night, I'm sure everybody listening knows the story already, but ESPN published a story that detailed explicit nude images from Jared Porter to an international reporter who has since left the business, and it was, I think, obvious when you read the story that Porter was on the verge of being fired and should be fired. And then we woke up to the tweet 7:45 on Tuesday morning from Steve Cohen that Porter was a goner. What followed was our coverage, and we talked about what went into this decision, and Andy was reporting on it basically all night. The decision the Mets had ahead of them, and then in the morning we had some details in terms of what went into it. But for the sake of this conversation, because it's been a couple days and a couple news cycles, I just want to play the question from Hannah Kaiser of Yahoo Sports to Sandy Alderson in his press conference, because I think it was really illuminating in terms of the problem in Major League Baseball and what has to be done moving forward.
You mentioned being especially caught off guard by this because you said you talked to tons of people in the industry and didn't hear a dissenting voice about Jared. I'm curious if any of the people you spoke to were women.
No. That's one of the unfortunate circumstances that exists in the game today. There aren't women in those positions with whom one can have a conversation and develop information or check references.
Something to consider going forward.
Yes.
Thanks.
So Andy, you've covered Sandy for a long time. We talked about this on Tuesday night, that the wheels were spinning in his head. You could realize the kind of pain in answering the way he had to. What do you think is next for Major League Baseball? How does somebody smart like Sandy Alderson, who knows that something has to change, how does he go about doing that?
Well, it's going to be slow because it's the institutional problem in the sport is that there's not enough diversity of any kind in rank and file positions. So Maggie Gray said this on our show Tuesday, representation matters, meaning public facing women like Kim Ng will inspire hopefully other women to pursue careers in baseball over time. But, just because Jared Porter was fired on Tuesday, here we are on Friday, and there are obviously no more women to call for references to anybody, no more women populating the front offices. Same thing with Black men. All kinds of different groups are unrepresented or underrepresented. So it's going to be very slow. And I can tell you that there are plenty of men in the game that are a little bit like, did he really have to get fired? If it was such a big deal now, why didn't he get fired in 2016 when it happened? The industry wasn't exactly unified privately in believing that what Porter did was that big of a deal, which tells you how far they have to go. I'm just telling you conversations I've had, like with people that are off the record, that are good guys in other ways, but are just not quite grasping why this was fireable, which tells you something.
Well, that kind of boys club mentality, I'm sure you thought it was fascinating too, but listening to Jim Duquette, and he talked about how his daughter wants to work in Major League Baseball and potentially following in her dad's footsteps. And Jim, honestly, on the show on BNNY kind of said, I told her to be careful. And this is a business that Jim's been part of for a long time. And for him to say, I was a little nervous for that to happen because I know that this stuff is prevalent in the game. And for a father to have to admit that to his daughter is heartbreaking.
I'm glad you brought that up because I thought that was really powerful from Jim, because when that's a real gut check when it's your own daughter and you're thinking, ew. Like you think sending your daughter into that workplace, forget it's baseball. And you go, I don't know if I want you to work there. That's not a great place for women. Boy, that was a meaningful revelation by Jim for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So at this point, Andy, the role of Sandy Alderson in the Mets organization has gone from president to president of baseball operations to kind of GM, president of baseball operations, and president. He's got everything under his umbrella, it seems. Is there any plan to go back to the structure they had with Porter, but with a different name?
Well, Sandy's going to move forward by assuming more responsibilities, and actually, I can reveal now, will be the opening day center fielder. It just keeps getting more and more and more. No, look, they're regrouping a little bit for sure. They don't really necessarily have anyone internally to promote right away. They could promote Zach Scott, who was hired just after Porter and was very close friends with Porter. Zach Scott's very impressive, but he's definitely more of an office guy than a field guy, which means that he doesn't have as much experience talking to players, managers, coaches, dealing with that side of things. So he wasn't hired for that job to lead everyone in the first place. So they'd have to think about that. Alderson is obviously more than capable with the same group minus Jared Porter running the team for a while. And we're just, there's fallout still to be had from this. So the shock of this is about 5 p.m. on Monday, Sandy gets a call from Jared Porter, finds out that this new guy that he really likes and thinks has been doing a great job has this terrible secret in his past that's about to come out, agonizes over what to do, gets more information, reads the story, reflects on it. He and Steve Cohen fire him in the morning. Now he must have spent the past couple of days going, okay, well, what's the plan next? Like, you want to take a beat and make sure you do it right. So that's
yeah. And in this era, and you smartly brought up this point earlier this week, in this era of a pandemic where getting to know people is harder. It's a risk to hire anybody always. But at the same time, it's maybe more of a risk now because Sandy's got a bad taste in his mouth, the worst possible taste in his mouth after the Porter hiring and firing. And now also he has to be 100% sure that he gets it right, because, you have to replace this person with somebody whose character you can 100% endorse. And everybody listening to this has probably had Zoom calls with strangers for some reason or another. And how exactly can you do that? We talked about FBI background checks, but you don't know for sure that type of research is going to find everything you want to know about somebody. It's just, that's why, like, it would seem likely to me that they just keep this within. Like, to your point about Zach Scott, maybe it's him doing some of the work. I don't know if he ever gets promoted, but John Ricco's there and Bryn Alderson's there, and Sandy referenced all these people, but
right, all, by the way, white men, which tells you
to our earlier point.
Yeah, and they're good. They're great. This is not a criticism. It's just, it tells you that even a person who's making an effort to be progressive minded like Alderson takes stock and goes, oh, whoops, my entire cabinet is the same background. So that shows you how long there is to go with that issue. But yeah, to the point of who's going to run the show. Look, they're not closed off to hiring someone. I can tell you that. That's not impossible, that they'll bring someone else in. And by the way people are complicated and we don't know all facets of anyone, how do they know that someone internal doesn't have something that's problematic, even if they know them professionally? So this is hard stuff.
So the other way that things progressed this week, Andy, and you've had a couple columns since then, but George Springer signed with the Toronto Blue Jays. And look, it's been, I don't know, it's been kind of complicated the way that the offseason has kind of ebbed and flowed so far, because once the Mets made the trade for Francisco Lindor, then the conversation became, okay, I'm sure they made that trade with the idea of a potential extension. Then that complicates Springer, Bauer, any other big name free agent that the Mets were linked to or potentially interested in signing. And I think Mets fans, at least judging off Twitter, which I think we all agree is a small portion of Mets fans, but there seems to be a split down the middle, Andy, of fans who are like, okay, like George Springer it wasn't a must. He was a super expensive player. He signed for $150 million. We didn't need that. Then there's Mets fans who are like, why Michael Conforto extension is not a sure thing. He's a Boris client. Why are we waiting for that maybe when there was a sure thing in front of us in center field. So I don't know which end of that argument you fall on, if any, but does it seem like to you that the Conforto extension really played a role in the decision not to sign Springer?
For sure. And as you referenced, I wrote about it, reported on it. Obviously, that's writing about it's coming from hearing that they started to think after Lindor. Look, they had to get a star this offseason. That was part of the deal, and they got one with Lindor. So after that, it was like, okay, let's think real hard about the outfield under this new context that we now have Lindor. And there were really two issues with signing Springer to one of these mega contracts. One was that he's a center fielder now. He's probably going to be a corner guy within a few years at the most. So then you have a positional logjam possibly with Conforto, although that could be worked out if someone plays left or whatever. But that's one thing. And the greater issue is having two mega contracts in the outfield. Robinson Cano's coming back. They want to give a contract to Lindor. So all of a sudden, even well-resourced teams want to be flexible, especially as players get older. And you can't, like, the Mets look at the Yankees with Stanton and Cole and don't envy that position because they're like, okay, well, the Yankees are severely limited and had to get creative just to bring back DJ LeMahieu. And, how much easier would life be for the Yankees if they didn't have that Stanton contract? So that was part of the thinking. You're thinking if you want to do it for Conforto, like, obviously, they're not guaranteed to re-sign Conforto, but if they'd signed Springer, they were virtually guaranteed to lose him. And I don't think they were ready to make that decision.
Yeah, it's been interesting because I sit next to Wrecker for Baseball Night in New York, and pretty much for the most part, he's the only one in studio's reactions I get off camera. And Sal Licata has been so adamant that he disagrees with the philosophy of, like, let's not have these two mega contracts at the same time. And people have made the Yankee point to him, Andy, and he's like, yeah, how horrible it must be to be in the playoffs every year and to be competing and have great players under contract, which is a fair take. But so Sal brought up the Dodgers and like how they signed Mookie Betts and how they have done what they seemingly want to do, and they compete every year. And Wrecker's point was like, Sal just doesn't get it because the whole reason that they had the ability before their World Series season to sign Mookie Betts was that they weren't tied to anybody.
That's
like,
right.
You grow from your farm system, you're young, then maybe you add a couple pieces, but then you have the ability to sign the guy that you believe is finally worth that like 10-year deal, and you bring him in when you have the ability to do that because there's not two or three others. So look, that is a valuable point.
In I'm more on the side of what Rex saying and Sal there, because the Dodgers, that's exactly like you said. So if you look at the history of Dodgers and free agency over the past number of years, think if Sal were a Dodger fan in this instance. They only were willing to offer Bryce Harper a short-term deal. You could go, it's Sal on Sports Night in Los Angeles. You're the Dodgers. Just sign him. I mean, there's all kinds of people that they've passed up on. I'm sure the more examples are escaping me. They had a big free agent signing was say again.
They didn't get Machado, and then they let him go to.
That's right. Machado, Harper, they signed AJ Pollock, but in that creative way where it was a very low AAV, so it didn't hit them on the luxury tax. So they behaved in this way too. And the way the Dodgers flex their financial muscle most is the way the Mets are trying to emulate, which is not things that are visible publicly. The Dodgers overpay for players to go to their AAA. The Dodgers have players making upwards of like $1 million in AAA, and they're better than most teams' AAA players, which means that when someone gets hurt, you got $1 million player to call up. That's one way that the Dodgers do that. Another way is that they have a huge research and development department with many people that are salaried coming up with new ideas. Mets just hired away an R&D guy from the Dodgers. So those are the ways in which you act like a rich team. Also, I mean, the mega contracts, when you feel that one is right for you, it's fine. And I do really think that the Mets would have thought that Springer was a better fit if they hadn't been able to pull off the Lindor trade. Then we're having a different conversation. And then Springer would have been the perfect fit. But now he's not.
Right. And the Mets reportedly were in the $120 million range. That's what they were comfortable with. And
Yeah, I mean, that's a little semantic, maybe. I don't know how much they actually made a concrete offer versus let Springer know what they would do, but it's not really important anymore.
okay, so if Conforto is, along with Lindor, the guys the Mets want to tie themselves to, when does that happen? And does Scott Boris's involvement in this, is he different from any other agent, given the fact that Conforto has played here for a long time and isn't a free agent yet? Like if the Mets, does Boris still have that reputation after the Strasburg thing that like he's an impossible guy to negotiate with before free agency?
Well, he did take Strasburg to free agency the second time, but I mean, I take your point. He doesn't always do that, and I've talked to Boris about this, and he always pushes back. He goes, "I'm work for my clients. If they want to sign, that's what I'll do." People roll their eyes a little. He does have a reputation for liking free agency. I think whether or not Conforto becomes a free agent, what Boris would do is look at the comps and say, you're not getting him much of a discount. Like if Springer got this amount, Conforto should get something similar, for example. So if the Mets wanted to do that soon, you can maybe get that done. But we'll see. I think the Lindor thing would seem to have a better chance of happening faster because if you follow that Betts model and sign him up, if you offer Lindor more than $300 million in spring training, maybe you can get it done. Maybe you can't do those things both at the same time, so you wait on Conforto. Maybe you let Conforto become a free agent, but just pursue him strongly. The timing of those things does remain to be seen a little bit, but you'd certainly take an educated guess that Lindor would come first.
Springer plays a more premier defensive position, albeit he may only for a couple more years. But if Conforto has a season in 2021 like he did in 2020, but a more full one, he's going to get a ton of money. And I think there's this tendency to look at him as like the Mets guy and like that they value him higher than anybody else would. But he's a left-handed power hitter who consistently has good seasons. And if he has a great one again in 2021, like suddenly he's going to be like a potential maybe $200 million player.
He's up there.
Before we get ahead of ourselves and just consider this a hometown discount. Now, do I think he's fairly similar to David Wright in terms of personality? And I don't know if he loves playing here as much as Wright did, but could I see him taking a fairly team-friendly, albeit very expensive deal? Sure. I mean, he's a player rep. He likes the organization, but I don't know. That's just.
I don't want to speculate too much about his motives because I haven't talked to him directly about this. But the more involved the players with the union, often the more they feel responsibility to take the highest contract because that sets a bar for their.
Oh, interesting. So it's the opposite of the point I was making.
Yeah, like Andrew Miller has always been a big union guy and is basically like signed with the team that's offered him the most through his career because he feels he has a responsibility to his fellow players to do that more than what city he wants to go play in.
Interesting. Okay, so what about pitching? Because it turns out that the source that told you that the Brad Hand deal was not close, as was being reported, seems to have been the source that was probably telling you the truth. Although it's not like they all weren't telling you the truth. Maybe you're shaking your head.
It's a very complicated situation because he fired his agent a couple of days later. There's some weirdness involved that I just can't fully detail without saying too much about sourcing, but the situation got a little wackadoo.
So is it possible that some have speculated Brad Hand has seen some relievers get multi-year deals and is now ready to get his own, and maybe his old agent was trying to get 1 year, 10 million, something like that?
Well, I think he was frustrated that his agent wasn't bringing him better multi-year offers. So he went to a guy, and his new agent's name is BB Abbott, who's a very well-respected agent, just got Corey Kluber $11 million, which surprised a lot of people. And I believe he'll get a 2-year deal somewhere. And I don't think it's any kind of sure thing that the Mets will be willing to do that.
Wow. So, it may have been close, but now it's not.
Different agent, different deal. You're talking to a whole new person. Actually, I don't mean to make light of anything, but if a Brad Hand negotiation a week and a half ago was Jared Porter talking to the old agent. We have a very different equation now, but on both sides, don't we?
It's true. It's true. So Trevor Bauer, Mark Feinsand wrote in an article last night, and we talked about it on BNNY too, that according to what he's heard, the two teams that make sense for Bauer still are the Angels and the Mets. And Feinsand basically says, Alderson has, spoken glowingly about Bauer, which is true, and that Steve Cohen's very wealthy, which is also true. In addition to what he's been hearing, why would Bauer make sense if Springer didn't at a high price tag?
I think that's an excellent question, and it would be mine. He would only, he's not as good a fit as Springer. So I agree with if you believe that the answer is he doesn't, and then I would agree with you. The only way it works, just like we said on the show last night, is if Steve Cohen wakes up in a mood. He's got the money. It just one less Picasso this year, and you've got Bauer. It's but there isn't a luxury tax in the art world, so I don't know.
How many yachts can you water ski behind?
But so look, this is why it's pretty much always irresponsible to rule something out in our job. You don't go, well, it's never happening. You never know. Steve Cohen could, like I said, just wake up one day and be like, to have a different thought. Like, forget the luxury tab for whatever. But it would be a change of course. That's all I'm saying. It would be a change of course from their current one.
There was actually a brief moment in the show last night where you were being Steve Cohen. So you were like, he might wake up one morning and say, and I thought briefly, no, you said forget it. And I was like, wow, that was good
close
restraint, because you were like, yeah, it was a close one. And I thought, Andy gets very comfortable on the air sometimes. He does about 17 shows a week. So maybe he's just about to drop an F-bomb on the show.
You know what? Some people do that and they go viral and it works out well for them.
That's true. You could just do anything. On cable television, I guess.
Technically, that's true, right?
I guess it is, but I thought there were, I don't know. I thought there were rules. I
don't know.
Why did Ron Burgundy have to, there was an era where Ron Burgundy was fired for what he said.
Well, that was broadcast. I assume that was in the era of three network, local news.
That's true.
Networks.
Local news.
We have to ask Kurt about this or someone else, but I think that you can say anything on cable, and the prohibitions on it are just kind of our own in terms of what our company considers taste and class and what the norms are. But I think maybe we could technically say what you thought I was going to say. I don't know. Maybe what I'm going to do? I'm on Monday. I'm not on tonight. I'm just going to do it, and then the fallout will tell me the answer.
Yeah, test the consequences there.
And it's better to say sorry. It's easier to say sorry than to ask for permission. You know that phrase?
Mm-hmm. Ask for, what is it? Ask for forgiveness later.
Right.
What can you report on this podcast what contract Jackie Bradley thinks he's worth right now?
$1 billion. I didn't write it, so how can I say? Look.
Yeah, you didn't write it, but I've heard behind closed doors of the number that we are reportedly talking about in it.
I'm not trying to be cute. The reason, look, you make choices, and I just knew that if I put that number down, it's a rumor, it's unsubstantiated. The truth is that he has a higher asking price than Mets fans might think. And if I put the number out there, it'd be like MLB trade rumors, report, da-da-da. And then Scott Boras is going to be like, well, actually, blah, blah, blah. And I don't need that in my life.
You're right, actually, because
it becomes a headline.
It would become a headline because it's a really easy thing to grab. We'd grab it. So look, if Jackie Bradley Jr. is a good baseball player, if he wants a lot of money, everybody wants money. If I have no problem with that. It's just, I'll just put it this way. This rumor, which I have been privileged to hear, I'll just put it this way for everybody. I thought Jackie Bradley Jr. was probably going to sign a 1-year contract for about $10 million. That is really wrong.
He's terms looking for 100 years and $1 billion. No, look, I'm being, in all honesty, I'm not hiding anything from our viewers. I want to say seriously that the difference between reporting rumor and fact, The fact is he has a substantial asking price. The rumor is the number, and that's why I'm not saying it.
Right. And also the important takeaway is, and I keep referencing last night's show, but this is a reference I also made there, which was I've been part of this kind of thought process on the air, which is, okay, you didn't get Springer, sign JBJ. Like, I just think he's a good player and would be a good fit. And the reason that Andy's reporting is important here is that it's always not that easy than it is for people like me to say, but it's specifically in this circumstance, he views himself as the not platoon, not, second fiddle. He views himself as a big time starting center fielder. And if you go to Baseball Reference, that makes sense. Like, he has power. He's really streaky, but he had an 814 OPS last year. Like, he's a good player. He's not going to a team to platoon with Jake Marisnick. He thinks he's an everyday center fielder. And if you ask a Red Sox fan like our producer Dave, how's his glove? He says, I mean, it's incredible. Like, if you thought Juan Lagares was a good defensive center fielder, wait till you watch JBJ. So from that aspect, it makes sense. But you're also hearing Albert Almora in center as a potential
that's
fit?
a guy they're talking about for sure. As Sandy Alderson has previously reported, a platoon candidate, late inning defense, something like that, as he continues to assume more power in the organization. Marisnick would be a guy, potentially. It's a free agent. I think they're more likely to go with someone to pair with Nimmo, whether it's for late inning defense or platoon-ish type situation or something like that. So we'll see. I wouldn't rule out Bradley. We'll see. Bradley's not going to get what his initial ask was. No one does. Don't rule out Jackie Bradley for the Mets. I'm just saying that Almora, there's been more talk about Almora lately.
Sandy, a right-handed hitter or a left-handed hitter? Do you know?
I don't know his handedness. I don't.
That's important. I mean, if you're going to platoon Sandy Alderson in center, you'd like to know, whether it's a right-handed hitter or Brandon Nimmo. All right, everybody, thank you for listening to this episode of the Shea Anything Podcast. We will be back with you next week. We'll talk to you then. Andy, thank you.
Thank you, Doug.